I'm Helen Lubbock, and my role at the Wond'ry is as a fellow for innovation and design research, which I've been doing for about 6 months now. And I also have another role on campus working for the Space Learning and Mobility Lab over at Peabody College. I started off as a research assistant for the lab back in 2017, and then worked full-time as program coordinator, and now I juggle that part-time with my role at the Wond'ry. And both of these roles really center my work with community partners, looking at design-based research projects and really exploring how people learn in these places. And particularly my job over with the Space Learning and Mobility Lab is looking at how we can design for and maximize learning in different spaces and places, which really center on mobility and how people are able to kind of move from classroom spaces, particularly to the community, and explore learning in those different environments. And that sits really nicely with the design thinking work that I do at the Wond'ry, looking at how we can support innovation in these different contexts. So my background before coming to Vanderbilt, I was an elementary teacher for 10 years, working in various different school environments in London, which is where I'm from originally, and then moving to Boston, Massachusetts, where I worked at a British international school. This was really interesting to see kind of teaching with the UK curriculum, but in a completely different environment, and kind of how learning happened, and particularly how we can use learners' different how we can use learners' different experiences, their cultural capital, their social capital, and how we can design for meaningful experiences that include the diversity of all learners. So in my experience with elementary education, the kind of question that was always kind of at the forefront of my thinking was kind of how teachers are positioned as designers, how they have so many problems to solve every day. I don't think teachers necessarily do view themselves as a designer and having that creative control. But just thinking of the amount of kind of design problems that they're faced with in every aspect of their job, kind of really, position this design work is definitely something that educators do all day, every day. So whilst I was kind of involved in classroom teaching, my interest really was in learning in out of school environments as well, particularly those environments that support what we do in the classroom. So institutions such as museums, after school activities, libraries, and through that kind of interest, I was able to pursue some of my work with partner organizations whilst teaching. So I worked in a professional development role, writing curriculum for the Unicorn Children's Theatre in London. And then when I moved to Massachusetts, I was on the board of educators at the Museum of Fine Arts, working with their education department. And then coming to Nashville, I've been involved with the education department down at the Country Music Hall of Fame, which is really interesting on a personal and professional level. And again, this question that kind of I keep coming back to is, how does learning happen in all of these different places, and how do we design for and maximize those learning opportunities? So my own kind of personal path to viewing myself as a designer was this kind of curiosity to try and find out more about how people learn in these different places and how we can design for those opportunities. And to pursue that interest, I enrolled in the master's program over at Peabody College in Learning and Design, which I started in August of 2016 and graduated December 2017. And for anyone interested in finding out more about the Learning and Design program, I'm really happy to talk about that in our breakout sessions later on. It's a program that really centers kind of the ideas of human-centered design, working with learners from different diverse contexts, and particularly designing with community partners, which again is the focus of design thinking. So again, realizing that not only teachers, but everyone in their daily life is a designer, thinking about the opportunities that you have to kind of create and innovate in everything that we're involved with. And one of the real strengths of the Learning and Design program is the working relationships that you build up with community partners. So again, I was able to intern down at the Country Music Hall of Fame with their education department, looking at designing for family engagement, working with Preston Taylor Ministries in their after school programs, the University School of Nashville with their 5th grade social studies teacher to design a curriculum based on community learning, and the Jefferson Street Sound Museum, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. So design thinking, this is something that Kevin touched upon in his presentation, viewing design thinking not only as a process that artists and graphic designers, maybe the people that we typically think of as being creative or innovative, not only those people, but anyone can implement the process of design thinking. And like Kevin said, it's really something that we can kind of keep going back to as a reliable method to help us understand problems and, more importantly, develop solutions to those problems. And I think the key part for me is really thinking about those people that you're working with, so that kind of caring deeply about the people that are impacted, the users whose problems you're trying to solve. So a more kind of formal definition of design thinking comes from the Stanford D School. Says there the process of looking at how design thinking can be used to work through these complex problems and come up with the possible solutions. So again, there's no right answer, but we might be able to use this process to kind of go through and think about things that might work, things we could try. So again, this is a graphic Kevin used that I think is really useful to come back to those questions that we ask. And design thinking really is about capitalizing on your natural curiosity. So understanding why something maybe doesn't work as well as we want it to, or how we can improve a situation, how we can make it better, maybe how we can make it more inclusive. So going through those kind of phases, thinking about the main point of the design thinking is that you're designing for someone. So it has to be user-centered. The people, our clients, our users, really are at the forefront of everything that we do. So asking those questions during the empathizing phase, really, who is my user? Sometimes it's not the people that you might immediately think of. There are lots of different stakeholders, as Haynes talked about, and kind of mapping the system. You know, there are so many people that are involved in these kind of complex systems that we might design for. And that question, what matters to this person? So trying to understand the values, motivations, challenges that are faced is really important during that initial phase. And then we kind of move through trying to kind of synthesize what is this problem. So what are the needs that are at the moment not being met or not being met in an optimal manner? And then what are those different ideas we might be able to think of that might solve this problem? And that ideation phase, I think for me, is the most exciting part, where you get to kind of be creative, all those kind of cliches, you know, think outside the box, blue sky thinking, but that really is the point of that ideation. How many wild, crazy ideas can we come up with that just might possibly work? And then again, we're kind of trying to synthesize that down to, okay, what might be actually possible? What could we prototype? And the whole point of prototyping is to come up with something that's real, that's tangible, that we can feed back to a client or a user and say, you know, do you think this might possibly help you with this problem? And then we can move forward to testing and feedback. And a lot of the time we then go back to the beginning. We might be back into, you know, realizing we haven't quite understand the user's needs as well as we thought. We might need to spend more time trying to get to the heart of the matter with the question, define it in a different way. And we might go literally back to the drawing board, back to ideation, having another 100 ideas, and, you know, the 99th one might be the winner. So taking that notion of human-centered design, again, the inspiration for all of our work is about that connection and that empathy that we build up with the people that we're working with during this process. Ideation, really that creative thinking, that divergence, that moving apart, and a lot of the work that we do thinking about the different people involved in design teams, having a diverse team of people trying to solve a problem is such an asset in this ideation phase, because we all think differently, we have different experiences that we are able to bring to the table when we think about, you know, the experiences we've had in the past, different cultural kind of capital that we can share with our users, different ways of empathizing and kind of building with them to try and solve that problem. And then that implementation, so feeding back to them, prototyping, experimenting, again, taking things back to a client and really working with them in that phase, rather than just a single solution that we're offering as the answer to their problem. So working with community partners, a form of participatory design, really focuses on that collaboration, that understanding that you're not going in as a design team that have the right answers. We can't kind of expect to instantly recognize their problem and have a toolkit which suggests, right, here's the thing that you should now try. But we do ask the right questions. So we spend time with our clients trying to work out what is their real need, getting to know the community, understanding their values, their motivations, and the things that they hold as particularly important. So asking the right questions is really key to building up that relationship. And thinking about that kind of trust, you know, if you want a user to really share kind of the crux of their problem, they've got to believe that you're kind of genuinely involved in solving their problem, right? So building up their empathy, spending time with them, really are the most rewarding parts for me of the design thinking process. When somebody says, oh, you've really listened, you've really understood what we're going for here, you really, you know, I can see how invested you are in this community. And the kind of overall outcome of participatory design is that we are able to kind of position those communities, those clients, those stakeholders as designers as well. Again, I think that's the kind of beauty of the design thinking process is you're able to share a toolkit with other people that is really usable, is really simple, and that they can use. And at the end of the day, you're trying to empower those communities so that when your design team has to leave the project, they will be able to move on and create change themselves. So I'm going to talk through briefly kind of an example of a community participatory centre design project that I've been involved in for the past couple of years, and particularly has been central to a course that I took recently at the Wond'ry as part of my Learning and Design Master's Programme. So this is working with the Jefferson Street Sound Museum, which is over in North Nashville. It's a community museum. The founder and CEO of the museum is Mr. Lorenzo Washington. He's the sharply dressed guy with the hat in the center of that photo. And the museum really is his kind of brainchild that opened just over a decade ago in the front two rooms of his house over on Jefferson Street. Lorenzo kind of grew up in the Jefferson Street community, which is known as the center of American roots music in Nashville. So R&B, jazz, performers such as Aretha Franklin, Jimi Hendrix, Little Richard, all used to play in venues along Jefferson Street, which sadly have now been demolished as part of the I-40 Urban Renewal Project. And Lorenzo's mission really is to try and preserve the legacy of this cultural heritage material inside his museum and share that with the community and particularly youth over in North Nashville. So back in the fall of 2017, I was part of a design team of graduate and undergraduate students from across Vanderbilt University who came together to work as part of the Design Thinking, Design Doing course, which was taught by Dave Owens and Professor Rogers Hall. And the goal of that semester-long project was to work through the design thinking process with a range of community partners. I think there were 10 different projects within that class. Each design team went through the stages of design thinking to work with a client, explore their needs, and come up with the project that they were going to design for. And our project ended up being centered on how we could increase the capacity of the museum to open up to more visitors, particularly as a youth space, trying to think about how technology could be brought into the museum. And we ended up repurposing an additional rehearsal room at the museum into an extension of the museum space. So what does designing with community partners look like? So thinking through those stages of the design thinking model, the kind of empathizing phase I've talked about already is really just spending time with the community. We were there for about 6 weeks, going over to the museum every weekend, watching visitors interact with Lorenzo. He gives an amazing kind of personal guided tour around that space, which visitors find kind of really powerful. Thinking about how the space itself works, how technology is used, how they take advantage of social media, trying to interview various different people in that space in the form of formal interviews, gathering oral histories, but also there's informal kind of observation questions. So that was all part of our kind of ethnographic research. And from there, we were able to move into trying to define the problem. So the asset of the museum is Lorenzo himself, but he's only one person. And if you have, a large group of visitors arrive, he's not able to give that personal guided tour experience to everyone that comes in. So here from our defining phase, this is a design sprint activity where we thought about a typical user experience and where some of the roadblocks might be, to kind of building on what would be the best outcome for a museum visitor and the different things they could take away from their experience depending on interactions and what they learned during their visit. And from there, we were able to kind of think about, right, how could we increase this capacity in the museum? How could we open it up to more people, make it more appealing for youth coming into that space? So again, that ideation phase, we came up with hundreds of ideas, some of them completely crazy, thinking about how we might kind of work on this design problem. And from there, we were able to prototype a few of the ideas. This is where we came up with trying to expand the rehearsal room that they currently had, which they rented out to different artists, thinking about how we could expand that space. So this part of prototyping, we obviously couldn't go into the museum and make a whole load of changes, but we did want to come up with something tangible we could feed back to the client. So you can see really simple use of Legos, paper, Post-it notes, trying to come up with a simple kind of model of what we thought the rehearsal space could be repurposed as. Then we were able to kind of use technology a little more. So this is a Google SketchUp model of what we thought the rehearsal room could be repurposed as. And then the most rewarding part really fast was then feeding that back to Lorenzo, his kind of joy that we'd kind of really understood and listened and spent time with the community. And we were able to feed back a design that he's now been able to actually implement. The new rehearsal room was opened earlier this year, and it's been really rewarding to see people move through that space and how he's able to expand the museum in terms of the programs that are offered and the events that now use that space that we designed for. So just quickly, I was going to share, this was the deliverable that was produced at the end of our semester-long course. Again, we were able to present this back to the client, which kind of produced a really emotional response, which was kind of rewarding for us as a design team. But this talks through the beginning of our design process. So I'll play the first couple of minutes.
Do you ever wonder how Nashville got the name Music City? Legend has it that the nickname originates from 1873, when the Fisk Jubilee Singers performed for Queen Victoria. Impressed by their performance, Queen Victoria commented that they must be from the Music City of the United States. Unfortunately, the kernel of the nickname, which originally applied to American roots music, has been overshadowed by country music. Located in North Nashville, Jefferson Street was at one time a vibrant aspect of the American roots music scene. During the 1940s through the 1970s, Jefferson Street was a lively area packed with clubs, aspiring musicians, and sharp-dressing individuals. Today, only one of the original club buildings is still upright, and a bouncing era is all but forgotten. Jefferson Street Sound was founded by native Nashvilleian and music lover Lorenzo Washington. Over the years, Lorenzo, with his late friends and celebrated musicians, Marion James and Jesse Boyce, collected iconic artifacts that represent the glory days of Jefferson Street's past. He opened up a museum in the summer of 2013 with the goal of preserving and pursuing the musical legacy that historical Jefferson Street has fostered, hosted, and entertained since the early 1940s.
There is so much musical history on this street, and a lot of folk feel we didn't have a legacy in Music City as far as black folk are concerned, but we do have a major legacy, which is Jefferson Street. There's a lot of history, a lot of memories, a lot of stories, centered around where we are, and the community doesn't really know that this exists, because everybody that comes in is surprised to see that this much history is being displayed from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Jefferson Street Sound houses a museum space, the last remaining recording studio on Jefferson Street, and a rehearsal space, which can be rented out. Our design challenge was to repurpose the rehearsal space as an extension of the museum space.
Okay, pause it there, mainly because the next 3 minutes is me explaining the design, and I don't want to listen to the sound of my own voice for that time, and we're kind of pushing up on time. So I think some of the things that Kevin touched upon in his kind of work with clients, issues that I was kind of going to bring out, thinking about some of these tensions that can crop up when working with community partners. I think the most important thing to kind of keep in mind is that we're designing with people, not designing for. I think certainly our design team experienced this kind of pressure at the beginning to come up with solutions, try and solve problems quickly, deliver something that was going to work, and that kind of wasn't the point. It's not the point of the design thinking process. It's to build this collaboration, build these relationships, and realize that we're trying to design with them rather than design for people. And yeah, that kind of brings up the same point, really building this trust and empathy, spending time with the community and really understanding what the problem is. It's very easy for a client to tell you what they think the problem is. And sometimes that tension builds up when you don't see what it is that they're trying to describe. And that's certainly moments that we've had in designing for various different clients, that you've got to feedback something that maybe isn't quite what they want to hear. Developing that bias towards action. So doing something is going to be better than doing nothing. And I think this came up in Dina's presentation as well, this idea of failing fast, but failing forward. So everything is a learning experience. If it doesn't work, particularly with prototyping, that's fine. It's feedback. It's something that you can learn from. So being open to feedback, seeing everything as a positive. If the client tells you that you haven't listened, you haven't understood, that's not what they need, that's fine. That's part of the design process, going back to the beginning and trying it again. Really recognizing the skills that exist in everyone and the expert knowledge, particularly that's held by those community members. So there's no way that in a few weeks we could have learned about the community's needs as well as Lorenzo did. He held that expert knowledge, and we, we're really conscious to position him. He was the expert. We asked questions, but he provided all the answers that we needed in that process. And reveling in that ambiguity, we don't have that many opportunities in life to really just spend time in the weeds, kind of get lost in a problem, feel kind of uncomfortable in that designing. We don't know where we're going, but trusting that the design thinking process will lead us to solutions as we move towards the end. I liked Kevin's quote that design thinking is optimistic. We have to believe that there's something we're working towards at the end that is going to be better than the situation that we started with at the beginning. So kind of looking ahead as to what we're working on at the Wond'ry at the moment within the area of innovation and design research. Again, being optimistic, we're trying to think about COVID-19 presenting some opportunities for us to do things differently and hopefully do them better. That comes with particularly thinking about how we can adapt those different stages of the design thinking process. We've had design teams go through the design thinking, design doing class this past semester. They found that obviously their kind of empathy building phase was cut short. They weren't allowed to interact with clients and go into sites anymore. So we have to think about maybe how we can use some of these social distancing requirements, increase accessibility without having those face-to-face interactions anymore. Thinking about maybe existing technology, how can we use video in different ways? How can we capture interactions? And this is a personal interest of mine in using interaction analysis as a form of a method for looking at how people interact in different spaces, how we can use video to capture those interactions. The benefit obviously being we can save that, we can go back, we can rewatch it, and really think about where is the problem that we're trying to analyze. So again, seeing some of those things as assets and opportunities rather than barriers or